What if the history of space exploration, the countdowns, the rocket launches, the iconic moments etched into our collective memory, is only part of the story? For most Americans over 65, space was more than a dream, it was a promise. You watched Neil Armstrong step onto the moon through black and white screens, felt the pride when NASA led humanity into the stars, and believed, rightly, that you were witnessing history in the making. But what if some of that history was edited? Tonight, we peel back the polished image of space history, the official press releases, the live broadcasts, the textbook photos, and ask a simple question. What if we've only seen what they wanted us to see? Because behind every grainy video clip, behind every missing frame of Apollo 11, there's a shadow, a hesitation, gap in the record. We begin with the infamous 1947 alien autopsy footage, once dismissed as a hoax, now partly confirmed by the man who faked it. Then we go further into the claims that the moon landing itself was staged, not to deceive the public maliciously, but to win a global psychological war. We'll examine a 1973 Mars landing video that surfaced decades after the fact, eerily authentic in its detail, yet no official record exists. And perhaps most unsettling of all, we'll confront the truth about NASA's erased original Apollo tapes, the very recordings of mankind's first step. But that's not all. We'll dive into UFO sightings from space, captured by astronauts themselves. We'll revisit the strange story of Planet UMO and decode how elaborate hoaxes often reveal a much more uncomfortable reality, that someone somewhere is controlling the narrative. Why were astronauts told to stay silent about what they saw? Why was some footage mysteriously damaged or accidentally erased? And what do ancient practices like gibbeting and secret societies like the Thuggee cult in India have in common with these modern space conspiracies? This isn't about blind belief in aliens or doubting every achievement. It's about reclaiming the right to ask questions, especially when the answers are sealed, redacted, or scrubbed from history. Because the greatest cover-ups don't always hide monsters or flying saucers. Sometimes they hide control. And if you've ever wondered whether the world you were shown is the full picture, this episode is for you. Stay with us. The silence between the stars might not be empty. It might be hiding something we were never meant to see. It began with a reel of film, grainy, black and white, a sterile-looking room. A pale, humanoid figure lies motionless on a table, its body strangely proportioned. Large head, narrow limbs, unusual eyes. Surrounding it, men in hazmat suits begin what appears to be an autopsy. No words, no narration, just scissors, cutting into something that, if real, wasn't human. When this footage aired publicly in the 1990s, it sent shockwaves through the world. It was presented by British producer Ray Santilli, who claimed to have acquired it from a retired U.S. military cameraman who filmed the alleged autopsy after the Roswell UFO crash in 1947, at a time when the Roswell incident was re-entering popular conversation, fueled by newly declassified military files and a growing appetite for UFO disclosures. This video was like gasoline on a conspiracy fire. But almost as quickly as it appeared, the backlash began. Experts dissected the film's inconsistencies, surgical inaccuracies, questionable props, and inconsistencies in the set design. Medical professionals were divided. Skeptics tore it apart. Eventually, Santilli himself confessed that the autopsy footage was a reconstruction. Dramatization, he said, because the original film had deteriorated beyond recovery. But here's where things get strange. He also claimed the reconstruction was based on real frames from the actual footage. And then, silence. For over a decade, the story cooled. But Santilli never retracted the claim that he saw real alien footage. Then, in a surprising twist, a single still image from what he said was the original film surfaced years later. It matched the autopsy scene almost exactly, but with enough variation to suggest that it wasn't the same footage recreated in the 90s. So what are we looking at? A hoax wrapped in truth? or a truth buried so deeply in disinformation that no one knows what to believe anymore? The mystery won't die, and that's what makes it so compelling. Because even now, UFO researchers, intelligence insiders, and film analysts continue to debate whether the footage, hoax or not, was part of a larger psychological operation. Some theorists suggest it was released intentionally to discredit real alien encounters. Others argue it was a genuine leak that had to be walked back before the public demanded answers Washington wasn't ready to give. But for those who believe Roswell was never just a crash, it was the moment humanity came face to face with something beyond Earth. And the autopsy footage, whether fully real or partially fabricated, was the evidence we were never meant to see. Even today, people are still analyzing the grain, the motion, the shadows. And with AI enhancement tools now, making it easier to study old footage frame by frame, new questions are emerging. What kind of creature had bones like that? Why were the medical procedures so inconsistent with human autopsies? And perhaps most importantly, why would someone go to such great lengths to fake something that didn't matter? Unless it did. This isn't just about what we saw. It's about what we were shown and why. And that single reel of film may have told us more than any official NASA disclosure ever will. It was one of humanity's proudest moments. July 20th, 1969. More than 600 million people watched as Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. But almost immediately, some began to ask a dangerous question. What if it never happened? The idea that the moon landing was staged sounds absurd until you start looking at the details. That's how most skeptics begin. Not with wild accusations, but with questions. Questions that, even decades later, haven't been fully resolved. Take the shadows, for instance. In several Apollo 11 photos, shadows appear to fall in multiple directions, suggesting not one light source, like the sun, but multiple lights, as if the scene were artificially lit on a soundstage. Then there's the infamous American flag seen waving in the lunar breeze. Except there's no atmosphere on the moon. NASA claimed the flag rippled due to movement during placement, and that a horizontal support rod gave it a wave-like appearance. But even that answer left people uneasy. Why include a support rod if you knew it would look like wind? And of course, the missing stars. The lunar sky should be filled with stars in the blackness of space, but they're conspicuously absent in most photographs. NASA's explanation? The camera exposure was set for the bright lunar surface, washing out faint starlight. Technically plausible, but when added to all the other inconsistencies, it only added fuel to the fire. Then there's Capricorn 1, a 1978 Hollywood thriller that depicted NASA faking a Mars landing in the desert. Though fictional, the film hit a little too close to home. It was released just as public trust in institutions was beginning to fracture post-Vietnam, post-Watergate, and many viewers walked out thinking, if Hollywood could fake it that well in '78, couldn't NASA have done it in '69? The film was so effective that it actually revived interest in moon landing conspiracy theories. It became a cultural touchstone whispered about in bars, classrooms, even among journalists. And then there's the most suspicious detail of all. NASA lost the original moon landing tapes. Yes, the original high-quality telemetry and video recordings of Apollo 11's descent to the moon were somehow erased, reused for budget reasons, according to the agency. The official explanation? They were recorded overdue to a tape shortage in the 1980s. Let that sink in. The most important video footage in human history gone. No backup. No secure archive. No raw copies. Even seasoned NASA fans couldn't help but question how something so historic could be handled with such carelessness. Some believe this was simply bureaucratic mismanagement. Others see something more deliberate. Cover up to hide what the tapes really showed or didn't. Older generations, those who watched the moon landing live, often dismiss the theory outright. To them, it's a slap in the face to American achievement. But younger generations, raised in the shadow of digital manipulation, deepfakes, and institutional distrust, aren't so sure. In an era where everything can be staged, why should the moon landing be sacred? Besides, if NASA was under pressure to beat the Soviets during the Cold War and behind schedule, wasn't the motive already there? What's interesting is that even among skeptics, most don't deny the US eventually reached the moon. The question is, did we land there in 1969? Or did we fake it first, then quietly go later when the cameras were off? It's a theory that won't die. Not because people want it to be true, but because the gaps in the story are just big enough to let the shadows in. And once you start questioning the moon, you start questioning everything above it. Imagine stumbling upon a video online that claims to show something we were never supposed to. Witness something that history, science, and official records say never happened. A manned mission to Mars. In 1973, that's exactly what happened in the early 2000s when a strange, grainy video began circulating on fringe forums and alternative research sites. The footage appeared to be old, filmed on analog equipment with all the hallmarks of vintage NASA-style documentation. It showed astronauts descending a hatch, walking awkwardly in what appeared to be Martian terrain, and communicating in muffled, static-filled voices. The scene was eerily convincing, not because it was flashy, but because it was subtly realistic, just the kind of sterile, awkward footage you'd expect from a secret space mission. And here's where things get strange. The astronauts followed real NASA communication protocols. The timestamps matched how a Mars mission would theoretically progress. Even the delay in their radio responses was consistent with the time it takes for signals to travel between Earth and Mars. It was technically correct in a way that would be difficult for an amateur hoaxer to fake, but NASA never acknowledged it. In fact, no record of any such mission exists in public archives. The US didn't even have the supposed technology to send a crewed flight to Mars at that time, or did it? Skeptics immediately called it a hoax, likening it to Capricorn 1 or fan-made alternate history projects. Some theorized it was an art project or an elaborate form of guerrilla storytelling. Others suggested the video might be a psychological test released by intelligence agencies to study how people react to controlled misinformation. But then came the black-budget whispers, rumors that somewhere within the Department of Defense secret off-books, programs had been funding classified space exploration projects far beyond public knowledge. Supporters of this theory point to the Cold War arms race, where both the US and USSR invested enormous resources into technologies they never admitted publicly. Could an early Mars landing have been conducted in complete secrecy, either as a military experiment or as part of a broader plan to militarize space? There's also the problem of where the video was found. The original uploader used a long-defunct account with no clear origin. Metadata from the file was scrubbed. The tape itself, assuming it's even real, has never been physically recovered. Just a digital ghost, a fragment of a larger puzzle. One vocal proponent claimed that a leak from a classified military server revealed multiple related files, including technical documents, voice recordings, and even a flight log, before they were wiped within hours. That user later disappeared from online spaces entirely. So we're left with a haunting question. Was the 1973 Mars video an elaborate joke? A Cold War-era experiment in disinformation? Or the only surviving fragment of a clandestine mission that succeeded decades before the public was told it was even possible? The unsettling truth is we may never know. But if the video was faked, it was done by someone with remarkably accurate knowledge of how space missions operate. And if it wasn't, then we've been living in a reality where our species walked on another planet 50 years ago, and no one ever told us. Just imagine what else might be locked away in vaults, forgotten file servers, or sealed briefings. And ask yourself, why would anyone go through this much effort to fake something? Unless it wasn't fake at all? It was the single most iconic broadcast in the history of mankind. July 20th, 1969. The world paused. An estimated 600 million people sat in front of glowing black and white television sets, watching the grainy image of Neil Armstrong descending the lunar module ladder. The words, "That's one small step for man," became etched in global memory. But here's a fact that still baffles historians, scientists, and even former NASA employees. The original high-resolution tapes of the Apollo 11 moon landing are gone. Not misplaced, erased. In 2006, after years of rumors and quiet inquiries, NASA made a public admission. The original SSTV slow-scan television broadcast tapes, which recorded the moon landing in much higher quality than what the public saw, had been recorded over during the 1980s. Why? Budget issues and a shortage of magnetic tape stock. According to NASA, they needed reusable tapes for satellite data during a hardware shortage and unknowingly wiped history's most important video. This explanation might sound mundane, bureaucratic clumsiness at its finest. But to many, including those within NASA's own ranks, it sounded suspiciously convenient. Let's break this down. These weren't just any tapes. They were the original telemetry and video data, the cleanest, most direct feed from the moon's surface, recorded at tracking stations like Parkes Observatory in Australia and the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in California. What the world watched on TV was a filmed scan of a monitor, meaning generations have only seen a degraded copy of what was once pristine, real-time footage. And now, that original quality is gone forever. The official report chalks it up to poor archiving. But critics argue that this wasn't just incompetence, it was deliberate obfuscation. Why would the agency that orchestrated the most sophisticated mission in human history fail to preserve the clearest record of it? Even former NASA employees raised concerns. One technician, interviewed in the 2006 investigation, stated, "Those tapes should have been under lock and key forever. Losing them wasn't just a mistake. It was a scandal." Some theorists believe the tapes were erased because they revealed too much angles, objects, or visual anomalies that weren't meant for public eyes. Perhaps something in the background, a craft, a structure, shadow that didn't belong. Others suggest the quality of the footage would have disproved the authenticity of the televised event altogether, confirming the long-standing theory that parts of the moon landing were staged. Another interpretation is that NASA never expected such footage to matter long-term. The moon was just the beginning, they thought. Mars was next. So why worry about old tapes? But history had other plans. Now, with the original source erased, we are left only with copies of copies, fuzzy recordings of television, monitors, shadows of an event that changed everything. And in those missing frames, a darker truth lingers. Because when the most important video in human history is accidentally taped over, it's no longer just a footnote in the record. It's a red flag. And maybe, just maybe, we weren't meant to see everything that happened on the moon that day. When most people think of UFOs, they picture blinking lights over cornfields or grainy footage from the edge of a forest. But some of the most compelling and least understood sightings haven't occurred on Earth at all. They've happened in space. Since the early days of manned space exploration, astronauts, trained professionals, engineers, and military pilots have reported strange anomalies outside their craft. Sometimes they speak about them on record. Other times, their accounts are leaked, whispered through declassified documents or radio chatter NASA never meant the public to hear. Take Major Gordon Cooper, a Mercury astronaut. In later interviews, he stated clearly, "I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets." He claimed to have witnessed a saucer-shaped craft land on a dry lakebed during his time as a test pilot, an event that was filmed but confiscated by higher-ups and never seen again. Or Apollo 11. Buzz Aldrin himself has spoken about seeing a light that seemed to follow the lunar module on its way to the moon, while NASA later insisted it was likely one of the mission's own detached panels. Aldrin has said he wasn't so sure. But the reports don't stop in the 1960s. In 1991, during the STS-48 mission aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery, cameras captured a small object shooting across the field of view only to change direction sharply, a maneuver that defies the laws of orbital physics as we know them. The footage went public, and NASA explained it away as ice particles being jostled by thruster gas. but multiple scientists and even former employees have challenged that explanation. Space doesn't zigzag. In fact, a growing number of videos from shuttle missions show similar events. Pulsating lights, fast-moving objects, and silent gliding structures, all just outside Earth's atmosphere. NASA always falls back on technical reasons. Lens flares, debris, reflections, or camera glitches. But at what point does the pattern raise questions? Especially when audio feeds from those missions occasionally include astronauts making vague but startled remarks like, "We still have the alien spacecraft under observance." Such clips are typically cut short. Transmissions go silent, feeds are lost, and explanations come later sanitized and rehearsed. Astronaut Story Musgrave, who flew on multiple shuttle missions, once saw what he described as a snake-like object floating and twisting its way through space. It wasn't attached to the ship. It had no propulsion, and yet it moved deliberately. And then there's Don Pettit, an astronaut and scientist, who stated bluntly in an interview, "I've seen things in space I can't explain." Are all of these respected professionals mistaken? Victims of optical illusions? Misinterpreting debris? Or is there a larger truth hidden among the stars? In recent years, with the U.S. Department of Defense declassifying UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, footage, and publicly acknowledging unknown craft operating in Earth's skies, the boundary between terrestrial UFOs and extraterrestrial surveillance from space has begun to blur. Because if something or someone is observing Earth, what better place to watch from than low Earth orbit? Satellites, space stations, and shuttle missions have provided us with unprecedented views of our planet. But perhaps we were never alone in that gaze. And as we continue to explore space, one question becomes more urgent. Are we simply explorers of the unknown? Or are we being observed by something that's always been out there, waiting? Whatever the truth is, it might not be found in Area 51 or the deserts of Nevada, but floating just outside our atmosphere, in the cold vacuum of space, where secrets move in silence. It began in the 1960s with a letter, then another, then hundreds, typed, oddly formatted, and sent to scientists, physicists, university professors, and even government agencies. Across Europe, especially in Spain and France, these letters claimed to come from extraterrestrials from a planet called UMO, sometimes spelled UMO. The senders were polite, highly technical, and strangely fluent in human social dynamics. They introduced themselves as beings of science, observing Earth, living discreetly among us and offering advanced knowledge. But this wasn't your average flying saucer story. The letters weren't wild or fantastical. They were written in dense, scientific jargon full of complex diagrams, theoretical physics, and ideas that some recipients said were ahead of their time, touching on quantum mechanics, magnetism, and cosmology in ways that didn't seem to come from a casual sci-fi fan. They signed their letters with a symbol, a double H, like emblem that was said to represent the molecular structure of life on UMO. Recipients described the letters as eerily consistent in style, tone, and scientific knowledge, regardless of who received them or when. Soon, rumors spread that the UMO visitors had landed in France, possibly Madrid, and were quietly monitoring humanity's development. A few believers claimed to have even met them, describing them as human-like but emotionally restrained and intellectually superior. And then, silence. Years later, a man named José Luis Jordan Pena, a Spanish psychologist, stepped forward and admitted it was all a hoax. He claimed he created the entire UMO phenomenon to test how easily people could be manipulated with the right kind of belief system dressed in scientific language. But the story didn't end there. In a bizarre twist, Pena later retracted his confession, insisting that while he may have contributed to some parts, the true origins of UMO were not his creation, that UMO was real, that others were involved, and that he was used as a cover to discredit something bigger. This only fueled the mystery. Over the decades, UMO researchers, yes, there are entire groups dedicated to this, have uncovered details in the letters that seem uncannily predictive, including concepts in physics and biology that hadn't yet been published. Some theorize the letters were part of a psychological operation, a Cold War-era experiment in social influence, and mass persuasion, possibly by intelligence agencies. Others believe it was an early form of controlled disclosure, testing the public's readiness for contact. A more fringe theory, that UMO was never about a real alien civilization but rather a red herring deliberately constructed to distract from actual extraterrestrial encounters or leaked science coming out of black budget programs. And the most unsettling idea of all, that whoever or whatever sent those letters wanted to seed a specific kind of thinking to push humanity toward questions we weren't yet ready to ask or answers we weren't supposed to find. So what was UMO? A hoax wrapped in truth? A truth masked by hoax? Or a warning that someone out there understands us far more than we understand them, and they've been watching, waiting, and whispering in envelopes ever since? Long before satellites blinked in the night sky, before rockets pierced the atmosphere, before talk of aliens, cover-ups, and planetary threats, fear was already a tool of power. And in the 17th and 18th centuries, that fear had a face, a rotting one. It was called gibbeting. At first glance, it was simple. After a criminal, usually a murderer, pirate, or highwayman, was hanged, their corpse was placed in an iron cage and displayed in public. The body, left to the mercy of birds, rain, and time, would hang from a pole or crossbeam for days, sometimes months, even years. But the true purpose wasn't justice. It was a message. This is what happens if you disobey. In Britain, gibbets were placed at crossroads, ports, and entrances to towns, high visibility. Near docks, pirates. Bodies swayed above the tides as ships came and went, sending a clear warning to would-be lawbreakers. Travelers would spot the skeletal remains of men they never knew, but instantly understand the price of defiance. Some gibbets became infamous landmarks. In 1752, the body of John Breads hung for over 20 years in Rye, England. Sailors reportedly used his gibbet as a navigational marker. But there was something more insidious beneath the surface. Gibbeting wasn't just about punishing the individual. It was about conditioning the masses. It was a form of psychological control, using shock and shame to burn fear deep into public memory. And isn't that the same blueprint we see echoed today? In modern times, the imagery has changed, but the method remains. Governments use leaked footage of unidentified aerial phenomena, ambiguous threats from space, or vague warnings about technological dangers to generate public unease. It's not about clarity. It's about controlling the narrative. Historians and sociologists have noted this parallel, where once we feared being left to rot in public, now we fear what we can't see. Objects in the sky, signals from space, secrets hidden behind NASA footage. One is visceral, the other psychological, but the goal is the same: to maintain order through uncertainty. So while gibbets may now rust in museums and history books, their spirit lingers in the calculated release of fear, the staging of the unexplainable, and the careful manipulation of public perception. Because if you can control what people fear, you can control what they believe. And in that silence between doubt and terror, power thrives. For decades, they were dismissed as folklore. Phantom killers of the road, whispered about in shadowy tales told. From village to village. To the casual listener, the Thuggees of India seemed more myth than history, more legend than reality. But in the 19th century, the British East India Company discovered something horrifying. The Thuggees were real, and they had been operating for centuries under the radar across vast regions of the Indian subcontinent, organizing, traveling, and murdering in silence. Their method was chillingly specific. Strangers were welcomed, befriended on long road journeys, and then, when night fell, strangled using a handkerchief or noose, often in sync, often ritualistic. The bodies were buried along pre-selected routes. It was efficient, coordinated, systematic murder on a national scale. Estimates suggest tens of thousands of victims over generations. And yet, they persisted in the open. Why? Because few believed they existed. To most colonial officials and even many locals, the idea of such a vast murder cult seemed too far-fetched. It was labeled as superstition, wild exaggeration, a conspiracy, but the denial wasn't passive. In many cases, it was intentional, inconvenient truths buried under bureaucracy and disbelief. It wasn't until William Sleeman, a British officer, conducted a sweeping investigation that the scope of the Thuggee network was exposed. Arrests followed, confessions were extracted, and just like that, the myth was real and people demanded to know how such horror had gone unnoticed for so long. It's here that the Thuggee story intersects with modern conspiracy culture, especially surrounding space, anomalies, alien contact, and hidden technologies. Because what allowed the Thuggees to thrive wasn't just secrecy. It was systemic doubt. The idea that something so organized, so wide-reaching, could exist undetected seemed absurd. So it was ignored, discredited. Sound familiar? Today, we hear murmurs of strange lights, classified programs, unexplainable objects tracked by military aircraft. Yet, we're told not to worry. Experts appear on television to dismiss videos as reflections, meteors, or camera glitches. Officials sidestep direct questions. Files are redacted. Doubt becomes policy. Some researchers argue that space anomalies and even potential alien encounters are treated the same way the Thuggees once were, as folklore, as fantasy, until the truth slips out and suddenly the world scrambles to rewrite the narrative. The unsettling reality is that truth can survive in shadow, fed by disbelief. The longer something is labeled absurd, the longer it has to grow unnoticed. The Thuggee cult didn't vanish because people stopped believing in them. They vanished because someone finally dared to believe they were real and act on it. So when we hear of strange objects above our skies or footage that defies physics, we might ask, are we witnessing isolated events? Or are we walking the same road beside forces we've been trained not to see? Sometimes the most dangerous truths aren't hidden. They're laughed away. Final reflection: what's real and what's a perfect lie? When we take a step back and look at everything we've explored in this episode, from the 1947 alien autopsy footage to the moon landing controversies to the disappearing Mars mission tapes and astronaut testimonies, it becomes clear that the most powerful tool in any conspiracy isn't the secret itself. It's the story around it. Let's think about it. One grainy video clip, one confession retracted, one piece of evidence conveniently lost or accidentally erased. In isolation, these moments might seem small, but together they form a pattern, one that feels carefully edited, not just for truth, but for perception. The alien autopsy film still haunts believers and skeptics alike. The moon landing footage, perhaps humanity's proudest moment, was taped over. The 1973 Mars mission video surfaced out of nowhere without a single verifiable trail. And we're left asking, if these are the stories that escaped, what remains locked away? Then there's Planet UMO, the letters, the symbol, the confession and retraction. An elaborate prank or an orchestrated deflection? The history of Gibbeting reminded us how public fear is managed, through shocking displays and unforgettable imagery. And the Thuggee cult showed us that entire systems of violence and deception can thrive in plain sight, simply because no one believed they could exist. So here's the bigger question, the one that ties it all together. If those in control dictate what's filmed, what's released, and what's remembered, then how much of what we think we know is real? Or have we only ever been shown what they wanted us to see? In an age where a camera is always watching, and yet somehow the most crucial footage always seems to go missing, maybe the most dangerous conspiracy isn't the lie we're told. It's the illusion of truth. Are we uncovering secrets? Or are we being fed a trail, just enough to keep us guessing, never knowing? If this episode made you think, if it rattled something inside you, don't let the mystery end here. Like this video, subscribe to Uncharted Mysteries, and drop your theory in the comments below. What do you think is real and what's just a perfect lie? Then keep going. explore the Uncharted Mysteries playlist, because the next story might reveal the piece they never meant for us to find.